Hello and welcome to the Orlando Sentinel Editorial Board's endorsement interview for the Orlando mayor's race. We have three candidates joining us today, Mayor Buddy Dyer and challengers Paulson and Sunshine Grund. And we are going to go an hour or less today and ask questions of each of the candidates in turn. And I'm here with another editorial board member, Daryl Owens. Now, one of the things we do in all of our editorial board endorsement interviews is start out with a couple of questions that we get out of the way before we move into the substance, a couple of background questions. The first question, and we'll start with Ms. Grund and come this direction, is have you ever declared bankruptcy?
I have not, no.
Okay. Mr. Paulson?
No, sir.
Okay. Mayor Dyer?
No, I have not.
Okay. And then the second question, we'll start with Mayor Dyer and go the other direction, is have you ever been arrested?
I was indicted and the charges were dropped related to a campaign issue.
Okay. Mr. Paulson?
I've never been arrested.
Okay. Ms. Grund?
No, I have not.
Okay. Ms. Grund, why don't you start and tell us why you're running for mayor?
I'm running for mayor because I love Orlando. It's where I moved to go to college. I started at Valencia and got my my AA degree there, and then went on and got my bachelor's and master's at UCF, and so also worked here professionally, and so Orlando's been good to me, and this I see as an opportunity to serve my community. And I actually have a specific platform, and that is because I'm running as a platform to raise awareness of the 171 acres that are of wetlands planning to be destroyed near the airport. And they've been having public meetings, and I attended those workshops, and I actually called the mayor's office, and I was not able to get an appointment, and I felt that my voice wasn't being heard. I hear my neighbors with the same sentiment that our voices aren't being heard, so this was a platform for me to bring awareness to that issue. And on a bigger scale, I feel I was made to be here at this point. So I'm going to take this opportunity. These are some of the ballots or some of the information that I filled out. I can make these available online. And I'm just going to give it to you, Mayor Dyer, if you can. Those are from myself and my children, just asking. I wanted your opinion, honestly, to where you stand and to just have a 5-minute conversation. So I'm running for office to provide a voice for the people, and maybe a door, maybe an opportunity to share with you that the citizens feel like our voices are not being heard.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Paulson?
Well, thank you, Mr. Owens. The reason I'm running is because we have had a 17.7% tax hike this year, which we can't afford. The hardworking people of Orlando deserve much better. And I think we can roll that back, in all honesty. Ad valorem taxes or property taxes are only 13.33% of the budget. And in the total amount of the budget, we'd only have to cut things by 2% overall. And I've got several ways we can do that. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to prioritize our spending. I'm going to appoint a blue ribbon committee of citizens, 25 to 30 people, that will go ahead and rank the different spending projects we have in this city. I've served on community development block grant committees that have had to rank projects. We're going to work on the budget and see what works efficiently, and what can be sunsetted. Maybe you recall Governor Lawton Childs, who came up with the concept of right-sizing government. That's what we need to do. We've got to live within our means. We can't give Mr. Dyer a blank checkbook to write checks every time and spend our money. The people of the city of Orlando have to work with what we've got. We're working really hard, but we can't do it with exorbitant spending. Now, I understand Mr. Dyer wants to continue that 17.7% tax hike for next year, but the first thing I'm going to do is work on rolling that back, and it shouldn't be that hard. I'd like to show you a chart, which I got from the internet, which shows the percentage of revenue that comes from ad valorem taxes. And it's only 13.33%. And if we cut that 17.7%, it's only going to affect the whole revenue pie by 2%. There's different ways we can do that. We can take some of the money from dividends of OUC. They have got excess money. We can take some from the general fund. And then we have to look at cutting costs by the Blue Ribbon Committee. We're going to prioritize things. We're going to sunset things. We're also going to look at consolidation, because there's some departments that are identical to what Orange County does. For example, the Section 8 Housing Department covers the same geographical territory that Orange County's Section 8 department covers. Why do we have two different departments doing the same thing to the same geographical area? Now, I'm not concluding specifically that that's one program we're going to consolidate, but we have to look at things like Miami-Dade. Miami-Dade has done things much more efficiently by consolidating things and working together. By the way, the mayor of Miami-Dade only gets $100,000. Mr. Dyer has asked for a 22% pay raise, and he's getting $172,000 right now. If I get elected mayor, I'm going to get $1 for the first year until I get our budget in line.
Okay. We'll have lots more time to get into some of these details, but I want to move on to the mayor for a brief statement as to why you are running for re-election.
Paul, I'm running for re-election because I'm more passionate today than the day that I took office about the city of Orlando and our residents. I'm more prepared to lead today. We've had great success in the last decade under my leadership. We've been able to govern by consensus. We have been able to have great accomplishments like the Medical City, like DPAC, like Sunrail, like downtown development, because we've been willing to collaborate. We've been willing to put aside partisan differences. We've been willing to put aside jurisdictional differences, and we've all worked together towards a common vision. We've also made public safety the number one issue, and we have reduced crime in our community 6 of the last 7 years by roughly 20%. In fact, last year we had the same number of homicides as we did in 1969. The population's a little bit higher. So I believe that we have an upward trajectory, and we need a continuity of leadership.
Okay, well, speaking of continuity, are you prepared to make a commitment that if re-elected, you will serve your 4-year term?
Absolutely. And I know a lot of people have suggested that I run for governor, but I can unequivocally tell you that I am not running for governor.
Okay. And would this rule out the presidency of the University of Central Florida if that position becomes open?
If that position became open and I applied for it and were the fortunate one to get that, I'd have to consider that position. That would be the one position that I would consider.
Mr. Paulson, you gave up your law license under investigation by the Florida Bar. Why should voters have confidence in your integrity as a mayor?
Well, sir, I've never been indicted by a grand jury like my friend John Dyer on the right here. I've never been arrested. In fact, I never had any findings of fact of wrongdoing. In fact, the Supreme Court in 2012 referred to me very favorably. I was called on to testify on behalf of the Florida Bar, and the Supreme Court referred to me respectfully as a retired attorney. So there's nothing there, sir.
Ms. Grund, the Sentinel has reported you're a pre-med student and a former private school teacher. How would you convince voters you're capable of running a city with a $1.1 billion budget?
$1.1 billion budget. Whether I'm managing $1, $100, or $1 million, I think I can convince the voters by sharing that you can trust me with your dollars because I'll spend every single dollar effectively and efficiently. And actually, I have my prior experience was in management. I've served on boards of directors before. I served on CBC of Central Florida, which was actually took over the leadership of previously FSMO. I was a part of that process, and so we obviously managed in that capacity. I'm actually the PTA treasurer, which seems little, but we have over $100,000, and so I volunteer. I step in when there's a need, and whether it's, again, 1 cent, $100, $1 million, you can trust me because I will be accountable to the voters.
When you say you're the PTA treasurer, is that a local chapter or is it statewide?
It's a local, the North Lake Park Community School in Lake Nona.
Mayor Dyer, you've raised more than $300,000 for your campaign. How should voters have confidence that you'll be representing their best interest instead of the many special interests that have contributed to your campaign?
Daryl, I always represent the people, and I think being able to raise campaign funds suggests that you have broad support across the community. If you actually look at the average level of contribution, it's quite small, or relatively small across the board. So I think that just shows support from the community.
Mr. Paulson, how are you financing your campaign?
I think you'll find that out after October 13th, Mr. Owens. We will file our complete financial disclosure as far as how much is coming in, who it's coming from. But the answer that I have been amazed to find is that we are getting multitudes of small donations that are coming in. It's tremendous.
And Ms. Grund, how are you paying for your campaign?
Through my family. We have completely 110% funded, and we're actually not going to have any financial interests at all other than to qualify, because we believe that money should be taken out of politics. And how do you do that? You start by leading by example. And I got this flyer from another candidate, and the Reverend Martin Luther King said that he dreamed for his 4 children of a country where they would be judged not on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. And I dream of a day that one day our country, specifically our city, the candidates will be judged on the content of their character and not how much money they have in their campaign account. And how we do that is starting by saying my name's on the ballot. Give the power back to the people. They're the ones that need to have the voice. The previous election, only 15% of the voters showed up. We have to take some responsibility in that. And so I start by saying I'll provide myself as a candidate, and you should too. That's a part of a promise for all our citizens. More than us out there are capable and I believe qualified to do this.
Yeah, Mr. Paulson.
Sir, I've been fortunate, and I say this honestly, I was raised in a poor interracial family. We adopted an Asian girl when I was 5 years old. When I was 10 years old, we tried to adopt a foster child who was African American. Unfortunately, the social worker said we were too poor to do that. I enlisted in the U.S. Army. I've gotten along well with everybody of every race, color, or creed. I'm fortunate to have been able to rise to the level of captain, and I'm sorry, I was much younger back then, but that is me. I served for 10 years, and I would also like to point out, I'd like to bring DOD, Department of Defense jobs to Central Florida instead of the lower wage jobs we have. We can bring defense-oriented jobs like Martin Marietta and other contractors could come here. I have connections with different people in Washington, D.C., and I think that's a solution to bring higher paying jobs to Orlando.
Okay. Ms. Grund, what can you tell voters to convince them that you're more qualified than Mayor Dyer, who has now been in office since 2003, to run Orlando?
Well, if we had term limits, I would automatically be qualified over him because he's had his opportunity to lead. And if you're happy with where we're at, then you have your opportunity. So that is a part of my platform is, I have the training, as shared previously. I have a master's in nonprofit management from the College of Health and Public Affairs. So I have the training, I have that education, I have the experience working. I did management in child welfare. And so that's how I can say I can best represent them by having their interests in mind.
Same question for you, Mr. Paulson. Why are you more qualified than Mayor Dyer to run Orlando?
Because I can balance a checkbook. If there's checks in the checkbook, Mr. Dyer would continue to write them out until somebody took it away from him. And I can prioritize things, live inside a budget, and roll back the 17.7% tax hike we have.
I think I should respond to that probably.
Sure.
Our city's in the best financial shape of any major city in the state of Florida. We have fully funded reserves. We have fully funded pension funds. Our OPEB requirements are fully funded. We have the best credit rating or bond rating in the state of Florida. And as far as rolling back a 17% tax increase, that's great campaign rhetoric, but a mayor has to deal in reality. And the reality is, in 2009, we went into a recession, and the state legislature, in addition to that, imposed revenue caps on property taxes. So our property tax revenue went from 137 million to under 100 million. And the only decision we really had to make in that circumstance was whether we could get through the recession. Other cities, municipalities were in fact raising taxes, but we decided it was best for our residents if we used reserves, if we made significant cuts, and over the course of those 5 years, we cut about $40 million out of our budget. And then once we got out of the recession, we did in fact raise revenues, but guess what? We didn't even go back to the amount we were collecting in 2009. And the year we raised taxes, we raised 128 million, and in 2009 it was 137 million.
Mr. Paulson,
Yes, sir. I'd like to show the good, hardworking people of Orlando a chart of what's been going on with the taxes. Now, the height right here is 2009. It actually reflects revenue from 2008. And what happened in 2009, property values were artificially inflated and not sustainable. Mr. Dyer thinks that we should have a budget that's based upon a non-sustainable tax revenue from 2009, which we all know precipitated the crash in real estate values and led to the recession, which we are now recovering from. 2 other points. Property taxes happen to be indexed, and so that as property values go up and as we recover from that recession, we're already putting 4% more into our budget this year. Taxpayers are paying 4% more just because we're recovering. Each year we recover. Now let's look at the light blue color here, sir. The light blue color is the portion that Mr. Dyer has overtaxed us by trying to compare us to that year which precipitated the crash. The light blue color is the 17% which he overtaxed us in 2016, and which he in 2015, in which he intends to tax us too much in 2016. We don't need to do this. We can live inside our budget. I've done that, and that's the answer. We can't afford to be everything for everybody. We have to consolidate programs. We have to prioritize what's important, what delivers to the people, what's effective. We have to talk about annexation. There may be some people in Bay Hill that are producing a lot of revenue from contracting jobs downtown. Why don't we bring them into the city limits and let them be a part of us? Because they're certainly benefiting from the services we have.
quick follow-up. You said, I've done that. Are you referring to a business, or what are you referring to when you said I've done that, referring to living within means?
You can look at my lifestyle, sir. I drive a Toyota Camry. I have 2 suits. I live downtown in a very modest home. It's about living within our means. I've also been fortunate to be blessed, and I'm able to run for mayor, but it's about keeping the spending under control.
Ms. Grund, do you have any ideas of what you would do with the tax rate if you were elected?
I'd obviously try to hold the line, if not bring it down, and I think you do that by focusing more on the people. And I was going to say, to follow up regarding their comments, is it's not just about me that makes the budget or decides the budget, but it's a team effort. It's the whole council, and I know there's a Mr. Battle, is that his name, who is actually head of staff in that department. So I won't be making these decisions alone. That's not a qualification per se for this position, but to be the voice for the people and to hear what their concerns are and where they want the money to be spent. And again, I won't be doing it by myself. I'll have 6 other council members to make those decisions with.
So I think I need another follow-up. So since I've become mayor, and let's distinguish, in the budget there's the general fund, and that's largely property tax and OUC dividend and a few other things. And then there are funds that are segregated that are stormwater, solid waste, parking, venues, that type of thing. So I'm addressing the general fund. In the general fund, since I have become mayor, We have increased public safety by $90 million. That's police and fire. All other departments in the city of Orlando have been reduced by $18 million, and that's in 2003 dollars. We have added 175 public safety employees, and the total rest of city government in the general fund, it has been reduced by 350 employees. So we are one of the most efficient, productive governments in the state of Florida.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Paulson.
Now I've got the budget right in front of me. I reviewed it today. There's some things that just don't make sense, and they should perhaps be explained to the public. We've got 24% of our proposed budget for next year called non-departmental. What does that mean? I think we should have an explanation rather on what 24%, it's $278 million, are being spent on. I've also seen that the expenses will increase by 7.2% for next year. And why is that? I made a mistake. I said that things have gone up, the taxable base went up 4%, but actually it's 14%. Things went up. In fiscal year 2015, the taxable base for the city rose by 14%. Now, if the taxable base has gone up, the millage, the revenue would go up as well. Why did we have to have a 17.7% increase on our property taxes if the base went up 14%? We should be getting revenue which is indexed to the base.
Okay, well, I guess we'll move on. Mr. Grund, would you tell me and describe with specific examples how you would expand and diversify the city's economy?
The city's economy, as far as providing opportunity for the citizens, obviously promoting technology, I think. And I think how you really diversify the economy is making it a place that people want to come to and live. And so while you can attract businesses here, if they don't feel safe, if they don't feel secure, they're not going to stay. And so that would be my main focus, is on promoting a place to live for the people.
Well, Mayor Dyer has said that crime has come down and that $90 million have been sunk into increasing public safety. So it sounds like that may not be that big a concern.
I'm sure Robert, who died earlier this week near Valencia, would disagree with you and his family. So I think every life matters, and I think every community matters, and not necessarily every community is being represented. And I think that we need to provide, and I think when people are healthy, we can bring the economic growth because people are going to be educated. I would focus on education. I know that Orange County does that as far as the school system, but I think we can focus on that and promote that for our economic growth.
Mr. Paulson, the same question. How would you expand and diversify the city's economy?
Well, the answer is we have to bring other than service industry jobs because they pay starting out at minimum wage. And we have to get manufacturing, light manufacturing, Department of Defense jobs, those pay around $30 to $40 an hour. Now, we had the Navy base here, which closed in 1989. With that, we have not brought any major or significant Department of Defense business here. There's been some smaller ones, but that's what I would focus on. Things like Martin Marietta, now called Lockheed Martin. I happen to service those units overseas in Germany with Pershing missile. And I know how important it is to our economy that we have companies like Lockheed Martin, that we have other companies that we can get to boost the wages. That's the real answer.
Mayor Dyer, would you like to discuss your efforts to expand and diversify the city?
Absolutely, I would. Number one, we came out of the recession positioned better than just about anybody. We led the country last year in job creation. We were number 2 in growth. I have spent the last decade preaching diversifying our economy, and the recession, I think, really re-emphasized that when home building and tourism dropped off, which are our number 1 and 2 industries. So things like the cluster at the Medical City, the creation of the Creative Village. Mr. Paulson misspoke. We do have a large defense industry cluster, which is modeling, simulation, and training. We have the largest industry cluster in the entire world right here in Orlando. And we need to continue to leverage the industries that we have. There's a lot of animators and engineers and people that work for the tourism community that are involved in the digital media world. So leveraging those types of employees. And then I agree with Ms. Grund on something, making this the best place in America to live and attract people, because you're only going to be successful in the future if you're one of the communities that can attract the young, bright millennials here. And that's what the venues have been about. That's what Sunrail has been about. That's what a thriving downtown has been about, and that's what Lake Nona has been about.
I want to follow up because Mr. Paulson raised the issue of consolidation. Mayor Dyer, what have you done since you were elected to consolidate services?
Within the city or with the city and county, we've had 2 different studies on consolidating any services between the city and the county, and for the most part we determined that both entities were doing what they do well, and that there wasn't a whole lot to be gained by consolidating services. Say the fire service was one of the things that we looked specifically at, and we're an urban fire department, and by the way, one of the best in the country. The county is more geared up for rural firefighting, forest fires and single family residents and that type of stuff. We have become very efficient within government. I mentioned that we have cut, in city government, that we have cut 350 positions over the last decade, which we have some of the fewest employees per 1,000 residents of any major city in the state of Florida.
Hey, Mr. Paulson.
Yes, sir. I'd like to talk about the homeless problem, because I go down to the homeless shelter once a month from St. Luke's Methodist Church. I've been doing this for a long time. And just as an example of consolidation, I have found 22 different programs at 3 different levels of government trying to help the homeless. I've found 8 of them at the federal level, 7 at the county and the state level, and 7 at the city level. Now, traditionally, the county has been the entity that's best able to provide for health and welfare. The thing that concerns me is why don't we consolidate some of this at the county level instead of trying to do it through different layers of government? It just would make more sense. The city has traditionally been police, fire department, streets and sewers, and in this situation, utilities. We have OUC. Everything else is traditionally outside the function of city government. Yesterday I had a pencil that said on it, Orange County Government. I thought about bringing it here to the debate or to the interview, but I thought it might be kind of hokey. Is the county in the business of producing pencils? I don't think it is. I think we've got to talk about what the city government is really about, and that's taking care of those 4 departments: police, fire, streets and sewer, and then also utilities. If we focus on that, we can live within our budget. But I'm going to appoint a committee of 25 to 30 people that will review all the programs that we have, and they're going to make a recommendation to me of which ones we should cut. We can't do everything for everybody, so let's do what a city is supposed to do.
Paul, let me just respond to that quickly. During the course of the recession, as we were making about $40 million in cuts, we looked at our core services and made sure that we preserved the core services and eliminated some of the things that might have been extra dressing, let's just say. But Mr. Paulson also raises another point. He suggested eliminating our housing department. Well, our housing department receives federal funding. It is mainly a pass-through entity for the funding that goes to the city of Orlando. So that's a department that we have to receive federal fundings. And then let me just suggest one other thing. Being the mayor is, you're the spokesperson, you're the driver for things going on in this community. You're basically the leader of this community. So I get involved in education issues. You know that I'm involved in homeless issues right now, and that's probably the top priority for my next next term is to maintain the momentum that we have created to end chronic homelessness in our community. We have a goal to end homelessness among our veterans by the end of the year. And just because that's not a core function of the government, I don't apologize for being involved with the issues related to the homeless.
Ms. Grund, we haven't heard from you. Do you want to weigh in on either consolidation or the homelessness or some of the other?
I have a heart for the homeless. I originally, a few years ago got involved because people were being arrested in downtown Orlando for feeding the homeless. And so he says it's the focus for this next year, but that was over 4 years ago. And I lived downtown near Lake Eola. I walked the parks and passed out sandwiches with my husband when we were college students. So obviously we need to be strategic in that approach. I think I bring that perspective. I was in foster care for over 10 years, lived in shelters with my brother and sister. So I know that one of the main ways to get through it from my experience and from working in the field is education and really focusing on that. Now that I'm a professional, I help support personally. I know the impact of homelessness and what that does for families, and in that way.
Paul, I need to respond to that. Ms. Grund, I didn't mean to leave the impression that next year was the only year that we were going to be working on homeless. We've been at this for some time, and I mentioned we've had great success in collaborating and bringing people to an issue, whether it was the UCF Medical School or the venues or the way we brought the community behind Sunrail, and now we have brought the community at a point in time behind the issue of homelessness. And we have followed the model that has been used in some of the other cities, Phoenix, Salt Lake City, called Housing First, which means you're going to put a chronically homeless individual, and a chronically homeless individual is somebody who has a mental or physical disability that does not allow him or her to lead a normal, productive life. So we are going to get the chronically homeless people that are living on the streets of Orlando or in the woods in East Orange County and get them into permanent supportive housing.
I support that model, by the way. I saw that. And I believe you have $4 million budgeted for this upcoming year.
We do, and
to
Florida
address that
Hospital
issue.
gave
So thank
$6
you.
million towards the effort, largest single charitable gift related to the homeless issue ever.
Well, Mr. Paulson, do you support that Housing First policy as well?
Well, it's a good concept, but I think we have to look at what the priorities are. I know some of the housing issues we've had in Timber Scan, for example. That's been a subdivision that has terribly suffered with crime, with drugs, and recently I understand that Bright House wants to cut off the cable, and OUC may want to cut off the electrical. So we've got pockets where people are seriously in need of help or in need of adult supervision. I'm not exactly sure what the answer is, but there's problems with several programs. We've got to evaluate programs that are working if we're going to fund them and make sure they're delivering efficiently. Otherwise, we've got to change the problems of the old and have new solutions and new ideas. That's what I hope I can bring. A new way of thinking of things and trying to involve the community, the churches, and everybody. There used to be an expression called 1,000 points of light. That was what one of the President Bushes used to say. But we've all got to get out there. We've all got to get out and do something. We're all in this together. We're all brothers, we're all sisters, and we've got to care about each other. Jesus Christ called it, love your neighbor as yourself. And that's what we've got to do. It stems from inside our heart. And this is the real answer. We've got to care about other people enough to show them that we want a better life for them. And a lot of it comes through charities and churches, which we have to work through.
Thank you. Mayor Dyer, the City Police Department has been involved in some high-profile excessive force cases in recent years. Does the department have a problem, and if so, what are you doing about it?
Well, there have been 4 really high-profile cases over the last year, and that certainly focuses attention. I think that's an aberration. If you actually look at how we report and track any use of force, we're probably more accountable and transparent than any other local government around. If an officer, any of our officers, uses force of any sort, that includes pepper spray or taser, his sergeant has to come out and investigate that. and write a report on that use of force. That goes up to the captain, goes up to the deputy chief, and goes to internal affairs. So we probably report more uses of force than about any other agency, but I think that the citizens expect transparency. They expect accountability. One of the things that we have done in this year's budget is we have provided funding for body cams, which will make every officer interaction with our residents more accountable and accessible. And I think that is truly important, because a lot of times what happens in police incidents is you get the last 30 seconds of an incident and a lot has transpired before that. So I think it's pretty important that we deploy body cams. And oh, by the way, we started testing them a year before there was a real call nationally to do that.
What's your opinion of that, Mr. Paulson? Do you think that OPD has a problem with excessive force?
It stems from sensitivity. And I used to be a prosecutor. I was an assistant state attorney that prosecuted cases. It stems from a sense of sensitivity that everybody matters, and we could say black lives matter, but everybody really matters. We can't kick people when they're down like an animal. We have to show them the respect that they deserve. And I've seen some of these videos. In fact, I was at the District 6 debates where Mr. Dyer was a no-show and Ms. Sunshine was there. And we watched a video of one of these 4 incidents, and it was just sad and appalling. We used to have sensitivity training in the military, and I happened to teach one of those courses. I taught women in the Army, and I also taught a sensitivity course for people that needed some attitude adjustments. And that may be the answer. We may need to retrain and reprogram people. The hiring, we may need to be more sensitive on the type of people we hire. And it's just the whole attitude towards other people.
Let me just fall back up
Sure.
on that. The 4 high-profile ones certainly paint OPD in a bad light, but I'm proud of what the chief has done down the line. 3 of the 4 have been terminated, and they're subject to criminal prosecution. So if we have an occurrence, it's not something that gets covered up, it's something that a light is shined on.
Quick follow-up, Mr. Paulson, since you've talked about reducing city expenses to go along with rolling back taxes. Would you consider reducing funding for the city police department?
That's one area that's a very sensitive issue, because those people put their lives on the line for us. The first responders, whether they be fire or police, have a special place in my heart. And talking about rolling back salaries, that's going to be I'm going to roll back my salary first before we touch any of their salaries. They deserve the highest respect, and that's one area that I would be reluctant to roll back salaries on, sir.
Mm-hmm. How about
Paul,
reduced?
if I could just say
Okay.
one thing about that.
Mm-hmm.
Since I've been in office, the general fund budget has grown for fire and police from 38% to 55%. And if you're going to roll property taxes back 17%, it's going to be very, very difficult not to touch police and fire.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Paulson, beyond salaries, what about the overall staffing level of the police department? Would you consider reducing that?
I would have to set up a blue ribbon committee that would discuss things like that. I'd listen to the chief of police, the chief of the fire department. I'd take some recommendations, but that's a sensitive area.
Ms. Grund, what would you do to the city's transportation network to make it easier to get around Orlando, and do you support Sunrail?
I didn't get to follow up on the police,
Oh, okay, please do.
views
And then-
on that. Well, no, and I support, obviously, if we need to support our current level of policing, but I also think we have to evaluate how we're involved as citizens to make our community safer. And so I would hope that eventually the police would come down, only because we're safer and our community is stronger. I spoke with a police officer yesterday, and at school, and he was the community liaison. And I was like, so what can we as citizens do to help you? And he said, volunteer. Maybe not necessarily, in the academy, but just volunteer out in your community. So as far as my approach is, obviously those are one of the, with my platform piece, keeping the streets safe and clean, that's a priority. But I also would just like to state that hopefully, eventually the officers will retire and there'll be a natural flow with that department, and we obviously will become safer as a city. So to the transportation
Please.
question, Sunrail, I think that it is something that I have yet to ride just because of my personal experiences, whether it be resources, time, money. And so as far as investment from the city, it may not, if we were raising taxes on the people, that wouldn't be somewhere that I would necessarily spend our funds.
Okay. Any suggestions for how to make it easier to get around Orlando transportation-wise?
Transportation, as far as traffic?
Traffic, bike lanes, things like that. more
Mass
sidewalk,
transit,
Yeah.
yeah. Other kinds of mass transit.
Mass transit, I mean, those are great. I mean, I've been blessed that I have a car and I don't have that experience. Not that we shouldn't have those opportunities for those people. And I think that is the direction to go as far as transportation. But if you do that, you also have to reevaluate the development of our city. We've gone beyond where you can get from one side of town to the other. I know we're working on links right now down in Lake Nona, but that wouldn't be a viable option for that community.
Mr. Paulson, you want to take a crack at that?
Well, there's some ideas I have. Number one, the wave of the future is headed towards Uber and Lyft. And we have to recognize that, because this is what's going to happen in the next generation. They are demanding to have this private enterprise system where they can get services that way. Now, the Mears transportation system has been supporting Mr. John Dyer significantly, and I think his hands are tied to that industry. I know the airport has been reluctant to allow Uber and Lyft to participate, but it's going to have to go that way. This is a good private enterprise system that supports people that are trying to earn a living, and I would say yes, we're going to go towards that. Sunrail has been an expensive startup, and recently some of the lines have been cut back. We have to evaluate what we're going to do with Sunrail, so it's not just a novelty. It has to serve people. Light rail is good on high usage lines. In this particular line, it hasn't been performing like it should. It needs to be reevaluated.
Quick follow-up on Uber and Lyft. Are you concerned about a point often made by critics that if you don't have a smartphone and you don't have a credit card, you can't access Uber and Lyft?
Well, I think even teenagers, 16 and 17 years old, all have credit cards now and smartphones. I know my son got his smartphone when he was 17, and it's just the wave of the future with new technology.
Yeah. How about lower income folks?
I think that we should have public transportation available as well.
Mm-hmm.
The Lynx system is adequate. It's doing a good job. I've ridden on the Lynx system myself. The fare, I believe, is $2.50, which is a little bit high. But we have an adequate public busing system here in Orlando.
Can I take a shot at that transportation
It
question?
just requires a good mixture of things.
Sure.
So I did not know that we still had non-believers on Sunrail, but Sunrail has been successful. We got the federal full funding grant agreement to expand to Phase 2 south to Kissimmee and Point Siena earlier this week. We'll expand from DeBary to the land, and we are currently working on a plan to take it to the airport, which is the next level on Sunrail. And we, Ms. Grund, about a decade ago, we did a planning exercise called How Shall We Grow? And the whole concept was we shouldn't continue to sprawl and have unbridled growth, but we should encourage nodes of development, urban infill, and we should encourage transit. So Sunrail was born out of this region's vision to do that. And then on Uber and Lyft, it's a bigger deal than that. We want Uber and Lyft here, but we want them to be safe. We want them to have background checks. We want them to provide insurance, and we want them to have vehicle inspections. We're one of the few cities in the entire country that redrafted our vehicle for hire ordinances to allow Lyft and Uber to operate here, but to do those three things, the public safety things. And if anybody thinks that they shouldn't have to comply with background checks for their drivers and insurance in the event that you're in an accident or vehicle inspections, I don't agree with that.
What about Mr. Paulson's contention that your resistance may be because you're beholden to Mears?
It's hardly has anything to do with Mears or the existing cab companies. And in fact, I've been working with the airport on a resolution for at least Uber Black at the airport. But right now, Uber continues to pick up people at the airport, which is an economic detriment to the airport because the taxis and limos that pick up at the airport pay a per trip fee that the Uber drivers are getting around. So we want them in our community, but we want them to be safe.
Okay, Mr. Paulson.
I know this is not a debate, sir, but I'm wondering if you could ask John Dyer how much money he's received, his PAC has received from the Mears company. I've read some of the contributions and the people that have donated, but could you ask him how much money he's received from the Mears people?
I'm glad to respond to that. All of my reports are public records, so if you didn't add it up, I'm surprised by that. But it's probably a very small percentage of the overall collections, and in most cases, I'd have contributions from people that care about this community, and they care about this community.
Mr. Mayor, critics of yours have wondered how the city can invest more than $1 billion in new venues, yet be forced to raise taxes and find ways to cut other spending.
So that's purely apples and oranges. Remember that the vast majority of the venues were paid for with tourist development tax, CRA revenue, and then private philanthropic contributions in the case of DPAC and a magic contribution in the case there. So it hasn't been general revenue that has been used for the venues at all.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Paulson, do you support the venues?
Well, there's several venues we have to talk about, and the one that concerns me is the old arena, wherein we borrowed $150 million from a state fund. Mr. Dyer imploded it, and now it's not worth close to anything. It's just vacant land. So that's one old venue that I'm concerned about. It's now an unsecured loan, basically. There's some venues that money has been sought for. Mr. Dyer certainly is interested in getting millionaire and billionaire construction contracts to his friends. I guess that's why they call him their buddy. But we have to look at who the money is going to. And the money is going outside of our city limits to people in the suburbs that don't contribute anything through their property taxes. So we need to look at helping people inside our city limits that have these construction skills, putting them to work. I was down in the African American community over on Columbia Street and Bruton Boulevard, where I used to have a Meals on Wheels route a few years ago. And one guy came up to me and he said, I do construction work, I do cement work. Could you get me a job if you get to be mayor? This is what it's about. We've got to take the people that need jobs inside our city and get them a job, whether it's a new venue or whatever. Instead of the money going to the people from Bay Hill and those other subdivisions, they've got enough money. We've got to help ourselves.
I don't think Mr. Paulson was paying attention during the construction of the venues, apparently. We had one of the most highly successful minority program called the Blueprint, and the whole concept behind the construction of the venues, which, by the way, came at a good time because there were a lot of people that were without work, was to target the population in Paramore, ex-offenders, and homeless individuals, to put them to work in construction jobs, and then to increase the women-owned and minority-owned business participation, which, by the way, was between 30 and 40% in design and construction on all three of the venues. And Orlando City has pledged to adhere to those same principles as they build their stadium.
Okay, Ms. Grund, I didn't want to leave you out of this
As far
topic.
as the venues, well, it's interesting because through finding out about the budget, I was a season ticket holder the year that I bought it for my husband for Father's Day for the Orlando Magic when they opened. But at the same time, when I realized, so I sat in those seats and they said, "Thank you for supporting us," I didn't realize what an impact, how I was literally supporting them. And I think it's hard to support that when we're not able to, when we're raising taxes. Okay. So, are you trying to get water, Paul?
That'd be great.
I thought you weren't going to do a Marco Rubio.
I'm not Marco Rubio, but if I could get a water bottle, that'd be great, gentlemen. Thank you
Okay.
kindly.
So that would be I have not been yet. Again, I don't know if I mentioned that to the performing arts, just financially, my resources, personally, time for my family. So I think they're great to have in the community, but again, it goes down to where are we spending our money.
Okay. Well, we're just about out of time, so I want to ask a concluding question, and we'll start with you, Ms. Grund. How will Orlando be different 4 years from now if you're elected?
Well, I hope it's still a great city that it is today. I think it'll be different in the sense that you'll have a voice in this position that hopefully is representing the people. I consider Orlando my home, my family. Since I'm concluding, I have to bring up my children. I want it to be the best place for them to live. And I don't know if I mentioned, I grew up in foster care. And so I just got this card this week. It says Ohana. So I hope that in 4 years we really have a community that's focused on family, and that means taking care of our neighbors, taking care of our family. We're thriving. It's a city full of promise, peace, and purpose. We have opportunities for all citizens and businesses, not just the select few, not just the ones who have the most money or the biggest voice in the city. Peace, I hope our streets are safe and clean. I hope that we don't have any issues or any students or alumni from UCF being an alumni dying in 4 years. Purpose, and I hope we have a balanced budget and we're using our dollars effectively and efficiently.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Paulson.
Yes, sir. The answer is to have continued, managed, but affordable growth within our economic means. We're going to roll back the 17.7% tax hike, which we don't need to have. That money should go back into the private sector, not into the public sector. We don't need to expand government jobs. It's like government is sitting on the back of the goose that lays the golden egg, and it's strangling it, saying, give us all your money, give it to us. And it's a private sector that produces the small jobs and gets the economy going again. We're also going to have to keep our money in the city. We're not going to send it to the suburbs. I'm going to try and bring some DOD jobs that are high-paying jobs, not minimum wage jobs. And we're going to get people to move here. We don't want the city to be overtaxed like the city of Detroit, and everybody moves to the suburbs because they can't afford to live here. This is a great city. It's a beautiful city, and the people are hardworking, but they need to have affordable taxes. They need to have great services, and people will come here. We'll be a magnet for everybody. So thank you kindly.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Mayor Dyer.
Thank you, Paul and Daryl, for conducting this editorial board interview. I love this city. I love working for the residents of the city. One of the things that's different, I think, in the past decade to now is every day I get people that come up to me and say, I am proud to live in Orlando. I am proud of what we're doing here. And you just have this sense of optimism that we can do anything that we put our minds to and that we collectively come to. So a lot of cities have made their history in the past and their course is kind of set. I believe we're in the midst of charting our course, and it gives us the opportunity really to steer into the future. So what do I see in 4 years? I see a city that continues to embrace diversity and equality, which I think are two of the most important aspects. It's our people that make this city great, and I also see Sunrail getting to the airport.
Okay. Well, we'd like to thank each of the candidates for joining us today. And we'd like to encourage everybody who lives in Orlando to vote on November 3rd or in early voting or absentee voting. Thanks for joining us.